Curtis's life has changed dramatically, as we can see that, and he's never going to get better, is he?
No. Unfortunately, this is a permanent condition that, as far as we know, there's no doctor can help him get any better.
Okay. When you determine, like they came up with the number $3 million, right? Is that based on like a life care plan that you came up with, that the city agrees with, or is that their own estimate? Well, where do they get this number? That's what I'm really saying.
It comes from all the different types of damages that you can put forth in this case.
Okay.
Past medical expenses, future medical expenses through a life care plan, past wage loss if there'd be any, future wage loss if there'd be any, and then you have past and future pain and suffering. So we put forth all the damages that we could put forth to the city. Then the case settled with a federal magistrate at mediation, where the magistrate tried to get both parties together to reach a reasonable settlement. So the $3 million is obviously based on all the special damages that we could put forth, and then I guess the city's determination of a cost-benefit analysis of what's the likelihood of a bigger verdict, and then ultimately for us it came down to we could really change Curtis Harris's life by this settlement, and we felt compelled to recommend that the case get settled.
I read in your recommendation that you thought a jury verdict might come in at $6 million plus in that neighborhood.
Correct.
And someone pointed out, and I think this is important for our audience, that Curtis had a criminal record. He had been arrested for various other things, not major things, but that was figured in, and that's what I was amazed at, the statistics of how much he might have received, had he gone to trial.
Well, you have to factor in the credibility of all witnesses when you determine whether you're going to go to trial. In this case, as you mentioned earlier, Officer Clark was fired for an unrelated incident. Right after this incident with Curtis Harris, he was sledding on duty and was fairly seriously injured, and he and his other officers at the time concocted this scam where they would say he was injured while chasing a suspect. He received workers' compensation benefits, actually I think was even given an accommodation from the mayor, and then months later another officer rolled over and said no, they were sledding on duty, and then he was charged with the crime and ultimately fired. So the credibility...
Charged and convicted.
Correct.
Insurance fraud.
Exactly. And the credibility of all witnesses have to be determined into settlement decisions. For example, the city thought they were going to be able to keep out all this information about Officer Clark's subsequent incident and insurance fraud. We were able to successfully convince the judge that his credibility is at issue in this case, so therefore this goes to his character for truthfulness and it should be in. The judge agreed. One of the reasons the city then decided to pay a substantial sum of money was because they realized that all that information about Clark was going to come before the jury. So when they had to assess his credibility, they were going to be looking at this incident with respect to sledding, what happened at the house, Mercedes' testimony about throwing him in the mud, all these building blocks into showing that Officer Clark was just a bad cop.
There was a big contention about what Officer Clark, former Officer Clark, and his two officer buddies said happened in that booking room, and we fortunately have with us a video deposition of Officer Clark, former Officer Clark, trying to explain his way out of what definitely appears to be excessive force, and we're going to go to that right now.
Curtis Harris down, you're trying to get him down to the ground. Did you get him down to the ground?
Yes.
Okay. Did Mr. Harris, or did you decentralize Mr. Harris into something other than the floor before he got down to the floor?
He struck the base of the north wall with his head.
Has ever lost consciousness after he, at least in your presence, after he was injured?
That's correct. He never lost consciousness in my presence. In
Was
fact, I've heard several instances on here where he's speaking rather clearly.
Let's pause there. Can you hear someone say, now you can breathe, now you can talk, oh, busted?
I could talk, oh, busted?
Yeah, now you can breathe, now you can talk, oh, busted. Did you hear that phrase used?
It sounded like it, yes.
Was that your voice? I'm just going to stop here at 3:19:24. You hear some laughter?
Yeah, there appeared to be several people laughing.
Okay, but you're saying you did not laugh?
I don't recall. I couldn't hear what was said.
That's amazing. to watch him try to explain his way out of something that's blatantly a use of excessive force. What are your comments on this?
Well, obviously, he had this Officer Clark had previously in written reports indicated that Mr. Harris had thrown a punch at him with his right fist. Well, when Mr. Harris is facing the opposite direction, Officer Clark is directly behind him. You can see from the actual videotape of the incident that's impossible for Mr. Harris to throw out a punch.
Unless he can punch backwards.
Yeah, and so when they acted it out, I was really surprised that they even wanted to demonstrate it. So they must have actually thought about how they were going to explain this in their deposition. And he and Officer Shanky, one of the other officer who was present throughout that night with Mr. Harris, when they acted it out and showed something totally opposite of what you see on the actual video, it was really striking to me. And it was also interesting, even after that, those depositions were taken. The actual sergeant who they had gave the use of force, their initial explanation of how this happened, they told him how it happened. I took his deposition, and then when he tried to explain what happened, what he was shown by Mr. Officer Clark, he said he actually the punch was like this, like a backwards over the back, backwards punch. It was just amazing to see these officers try and concoct this story.
I got to say this. They're not stupid. I mean, they've all seen the video.
Well,
how can they try to say anything other than what seems rationally the case?
That's the funny part about what happened in the depositions is most lawyers, when you're preparing your client for a deposition, you don't want to show them anything in advance because they can be asked by the other lawyer, what did you look at in advance of the deposition? Then that's discoverable to the other lawyer. So the city attorney in this case did not show the videotape to the officers in advance.
But the city attorney knew what was on the tape.
But knew it was on the tape. So after it was
they
over,
set themselves up.
Yeah, it's funny because after it was over, the officer made a comment to Todd saying, "I knew I should have watched that videotape," because then during the deposition, he was obviously shown what happened in the videotape, and his testimony then he knew at that time was compromised by what the actual video showed.
It would seem to me that if you're an officer, how long had Clark been an officer? A number of years, right?
Yeah.
Okay, it would seem to me that they are aware that this video camera is in the booking room. One of the first things that I would think, if I was involved, I was trading places with him, would be, what do we do about that videotape? Because I'm sure there's instances where all of a sudden the video camera wasn't working, right?
We were quite surprised that there was a videotape and very happy we had a copy of it. I mean, obviously, when there's a police report that says my client threw a punch at an officer, if all we had was the report showing a punch was thrown and my client saying no, it wasn't, that would be a very, very difficult case. But that videotape showing the truth of what happened that night, was the single piece of evidence most important to get the case resolved.
Kevin Clark, as you said earlier, was eventually convicted of insurance fraud.
He was.
Right. And did he do any jail time?
No.
Okay. Was anybody else reprimanded at the Milwaukee Police Department for this unfortunate event?
For the Curtis Harris incident? Yeah. No, unfortunately not. As I said, Internal Affairs did an investigation. Nothing in that report talked about what happened back at Curtis's sister's house.
Yeah.
It was all done in a way that showed Mr. Harris threw a punch. Everything was skewed in that way. So when they brought it to the district attorney's office to review, the district attorney's office decided not to charge Officer Clark with anything as a result of this incident.
Generally, internal affairs exist in any law enforcement to determine what the truth is, right? But generally, if you lie to internal affairs, isn't that grounds to be dismissed?
It is, and what happened is the internal affairs officer, when he did his investigation, looked at the videotape himself and said it was inconclusive as to whether or not Curtis Harris threw a punch. So it seemed to us, at least, that there was a code of silence that not only started in the booking room, but had gone through then to internal affairs in a way to kind of sugarcoat what happened here.
Now, this, I understand, was the biggest settlement that the city of Milwaukee has paid in police brutality cases, isn't it?
It is, and it's also, we believe, the biggest settlement in a police brutality case in the state's history.
And unfortunately, Curtis Harris is living proof of it now, isn't he?
He is, unfortunately.
What kind of advice do you give viewers if they think they might have a civil rights case? What is the criteria that they should look at?
Well, they certainly should try and find an attorney who handles civil rights cases, and immediately try and get in touch with that attorney so that that attorney can get to work on securing evidence so they can try and establish a case.
I would say that these civil rights cases are very, very difficult cases. And the city, whatever city you're in, or the governmental entity, fights these cases tooth and nail.
Yeah.
So in order to have, unfortunately, a viable civil rights case, you have to have big damages, because these cases can cost thousands and thousands of dollars to fund, hiring experts, doing depositions. So unfortunately, to bring these cases, in a lot of circumstances, the injuries have to be fairly significant.
You took lots of hours of deposition of Kevin Clark, didn't you?
We did.
Did he hold up well during the whole thing?
I sure don't think so. I mean, to me, when you watch the videotape, it shows him, in my mind, to be just a liar.
Okay.
Well, it was interesting, his character. Just before I began the deposition, he actually walked up to me because he had seen me once before, because we had tried, there was a scheduling mishap, and we had seen him, I'd seen him the week before. And he walked up to me and he actually said, I'm surprised to see you wearing a different suit. I figured you'd only own one suit. So he
Why is that?
Just insulted me. And then he went in and in my opinion, buried himself.
Yeah. And it's I think important to note to the audience that this officer showed not 1 ounce of remorse to what he did to Curtis Harris from the day of the incident up until the time of settlement. And then the deposition, when it was talked about the sledding incident and the fact that he lost his job, he cried like a baby over losing his job. But when it comes to rendering someone a quadriplegic, there was no remorse whatsoever.
Well, maybe his payment is yet to be due. Huh?
We can only hope.
Well, I want to thank you very much for being on the show, Todd.
Thank you.
And
thank you so much.
It's great having you on the program, and keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at www.insiderexclusive.tv.